All right, welcome back, everybody. We have been talking about charting, and so we finished up talking about the concordance. And at the end of that discussion, one of the questions that Brother Frost asked here was talking about accountability, but it really kind of fed into the next slide, I think, talking about motivation.
Right. Which Avery brought up, that one way that I kept him motivated and kept him accountable was I just literally hounded him all the time. And that's something that when you do have that relationship,
Did it work?
You know,
Right, it worked. So
yeah, when you have that relationship, and he knew that me hounding him was out of love, right? I'm hounding him because I want him to excel and do his best, right? And when he knows that, it's a little easier to accept the hounding. I remember there was one time he talked about it in his last year's speech at state finals that he was really struggling with a lot of stuff that he had on his plate. He was stressed out, and quizzing was kind of going on the back burner. You know what I did? I went to Janet's Bakery. I bought a piece of chocolate cake, and I showed up at his house during my lunch break, and I said, "Let's quote," and it's sometimes you have to.
Did he let you in?
He thought about not, but he did, and that just that helped him kind of get back on track and us kind of work through those seasons, because there's seasons of the quiz season. There's parts of the quiz season they're grinds. It's a grind. It's a marathon.
Yeah.
Okay. Keeping motivation is critical for your team to peak at the right time each quiz season. I know coaches that make their kids quote everything every day. And if that works for you and your kids, fantastic. That's awesome. I don't think I'll ever get my kids to quote everything every day. But what's important is that we ramp it up at the right times of the season, right? Like right now, it's October. I don't want my kids quoting and charting, In January, we're going to have our first tournament. Like I want them to know their stuff, but I don't really care about charting. I don't really, we're not getting, in February. All right, we need to kind of build it up a little more. March, getting ready for BQE. We're having I'm having more one-on-one practices. We're going to talk about that. And then obviously for state finals, like you want your kids to peak at the right time. You don't want burnout. Kids can get burned out. Kids got a lot on their plates with high school and other responsibilities. And like we said, we want our kids doing more than Bible quizzing. We want our kids teaching Bible studies. We want our kids involved in other aspects of the church and in their youth group. Ideas, fellowship, get your quiz team together, have a cookout at your house, have a movie night, get together and with fellowship with other churches quiz programs. If you're blessed to have somebody close by, group Bible studies on the material. I've used my father and other people to teach Bible study, especially when we did like Hebrews and Romans and things that were a little tougher to understand. That was great. Really stemmed a lot of great conversation on the material, kind of open, was enlightening. Joint practices. I know Darren has been fantastic in bringing his kids up, especially like prior to BQE, prior to big times where we get together and we sharpen each other, right? And that's really motivating. And you don't want your buddies to come to your church and whip you in practice. So like that's a little extra motivation. Trophy presentations. We have a pastor that is all in on Bible quizzing, which is such a blessing. And every month we do a trophy presentation, and it's huge for recruitment. It's huge for promotion. And it really is motivating. I know it kind of gets old whenever you're 18 and you've had 1,000 of these times where you had on Sunday morning, you get up and you get, they hand you your ribbons, and maybe you didn't have a good tournament, maybe we didn't trophy, but you know what? You're still going to get up on stage. We're still going to celebrate you every month. And that's something. And then remind them of the goals they set for themselves. This is, something that I said, developing that relationship, having them know that everything you're saying to them when you're hounding them, quote unquote, as Avery says I did to him, it's in love, and it's because you want what's best for them, and they have to trust you, and you have to have that developed relationship together. Caution, starting too soon in the season. Every kid's different. Every program's different. Building incentives too quickly. If you do incentivize, like they say on the first date, with the girl, you shouldn't go all out. Maybe don't bring her to the nicest restaurant, and maybe don't give her 3 dozen roses. Maybe start with 1 rose and then kind of build up from there. Just dating advice for these fellows over here. But don't build your incentives too quickly. Build your incentives as you go on. Burnout, like we said, annual letdown times, post BQE, between BQE and state finals. It's usually when stuff with school picks up. It's usually, that it's just that point of the season where they studied hard for BQE, hopefully, and then they've got a kind of a break before state finals. It's really easy to lose motivation and just get caught up in other things. It's very hard to keep that going. You have to be aware of the times of the season where your kids kind of get burnt out and a little tired. And then don't compare your kids to other kids. Every kid's different. Every kid's unique. Every kid's valuable. Every kid has a role in this ministry, even if they don't even hit the buzzer. Every kid can have a role on your team. But I just found that comparing kids, and I've been blessed to coach amazing kids, and I guess don't compare them negatively or say you should be more like so and so. Like especially goodness with siblings. Like I coach Sharon Newton, and I don't ever want to tell Sharon, hey, you should be more like Sherwin, because we want to edify and lift each other up and know that all these kids are different, and we had to help them excel at their strengths. Figure out what motivates your kids and lead them toward developing daily disciplined study of the Word of God. It is God. That's something that Rainey really just opened my eyes to. If you stop calling it go study your Bible quizzing or go do your Bible quizzing or go learn your verses and say, hey, it's time for us to spend time with God. This is our daily time with God.
Ooh. That's John 1:1 right there.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm getting a little emotional. But if we flip that and stop considering it to be a chore and start saying, hey, this is how we're going to spend time with God. We're going to dive into His Word and we're going to spend time with God today. I think that's a great way to frame it. All right.
So we're going to kind of transition here a little bit. We'll start talking about some practical things, right? And of course, practices is one thing that everybody always wants to know. How do you run your practices? What do you do in practice? And again, this is one of those things. It depends on your specific situation. And we can tell you some things that I've found that have been successful for me personally. But in a lot of ways, it's a trial and error type thing. You got to kind of find it. And as a coach, you got to sort of figure out what works with the personalities and the young people that you have. But having said that, I think there are some foundational things, fundamental things that we have to keep in mind. Obviously, first thing is first. This is a spiritual endeavor, right? We've talked about that a lot, and I hope we continue to talk about that because that's what it is. It's a spiritual endeavor. What we're doing and why we're doing it, we have to always keep that in our mind, and not only our mind, but in also the quizzers' minds, as you just talked about, spending time with God. That's what we have to make sure is the primary focus. Secondary to that, but from a more competitive standpoint, I feel like a lot of teams don't necessarily spend as much time in a one-on-one environment. A lot of coaches don't with their quizzers. And I feel like that they are not optimizing their quiz practices in many ways because of that. I think each kid is different and each one needs attention to help them develop and grow and get better at the things that they need to get better at. And so as part, again, of our coaching job, we want to understand what those things are, to know exactly what it is that this young person needs to work on, and then take the time just with them to sit down just with them and help them on those things. And it may be from a quizzing strategy standpoint that you have determined that this particular young person is somebody that I want to use to really help us in the 10 pointers. Well, when you have that one-on-one time, you may focus on those then. Or this particular person is really struggling with 20-point multiple questions, 3-4-part questions. Well, take some time one-on-one and read them nothing but those type questions. Help them understand how they can see patterns and know where questions are going, all of those type things. And I think that we rob our teams of their opportunities to be the best they can be because we just try to keep everybody together all the time, and we don't take that one-on-one time. Now, having said that, obviously, it's also crucial to have those times where you practice together because you don't know the team chemistry if they're always separate. You got to get them together, same room, read questions, understand how they react to one another. Personalities are huge when it comes to building teams, even when it comes to where they sit at the quiz board. Your best quizzer may not be the person that should be sitting at number one.
It shouldn't matter, but it does.
It does.
matter.
It does. It absolutely does. Just because, I mean, and even things like gender, their ages, all of those things you have to consider when you're talking about ways that can make your team the best that it can be. So you have to discover those things, and the way you discover them is you practice with them. How does it work? I coached two amazing young men. Both were excellent quizzers, but one of them probably was a little bit better than the other and was not the captain, just because of the demeanor, just because of the way that they approached things and thought about things. As a quizzer, he was a little better quizzer, but as a captain, he was not the right choice. So there are more things involved in that than just ability, skill, technical, and you have to see those things. You have to understand those things.
And you may have to have a little trial and error. With
Yeah,
that. So
exactly.
Try different things
And
see what
trial and error, and we'll talk about it later, but tournaments are a great opportunity for that. So team practices. And then the other big thing I want to talk about is have a plan. Don't just go into your practices saying, oh, I don't know what we're going to do tonight. What do you guys feel like doing? Have a plan. Be intentional. That's a big word for me. Be intentional. Do something with a purpose. Know what you're going to do going in and do it. Make sure that the kids are understanding that this is on purpose, that this is something that we're going to do, and here's why we're going to do it. And I think that just them understanding that you are taking it that seriously and having a plan. And again, we've got up here, take it seriously, but also have fun, right? Because we are dealing with young people, and their ability to stay intense and focused for long periods of time is not necessarily at its peak levels during their teenage years. So we know that, we understand that. So have some fun, but when it's time to get serious, get serious. As Brother Philip talked about earlier, sorry, I did it. As Philip talked about earlier, quizzers need to be sharpened. So a great way to do that is within practices. Next slide, sir.
All right.
This is me. Yeah.
Sorry.
So again, some ways to do that, some practical ways to do that. Question drills. I mean, this is stuff that we all know, but not just reading a quiz for all questions. Focus on specific type questions, specific point value of questions. Understand which quizzers are better at which things, because then that helps you formulate your team in a way that will give them the best chance for competitive success. Don't just say, okay, everybody go answer all the questions. And this is something that we've been back and forth on for years, is these sort of strategies with how to utilize quizzers within quizzes. And I feel like I've gotten to the place in all these years where I just think that each quizzer has a strength. Use that strength. And another quizzer may have a different strength. Use that strength. Doesn't mean somebody can't hit in the 20s, but man, if they're way comfortable and super good in the 10s, let them go. Work on that. Use that. So to understand those things, you have to know them, right? And so you find that out by reading different types of questions, reading different point values of questions, focusing on those things. Challenge your kids to master those things that they're good at. Don't let them just be complacent with being good. Challenge them to get better, and then add to those things as they grow year over year. If your quizzer or your team struggles with a certain type of question, this is how you fix it. You just repeat it.
Team's not good at 20.3 part questions. Do a 20 minutes straight of 20.3 part
or
questions.
a whole quiz practice.
Yeah.
Nothing but 20.3 part questions.
And talk about them.
Yeah, exactly. And not just reading them, and that's key. You have to help them understand what it is that they're not doing correctly. Why am I missing this all the time?
But and another thing is, as coaches, we have to know when they're wrong and when they're not wrong. We have to be able to say it. And sometimes I say, you know what? I think you're right, but you might be counted wrongs, but if you did this, you definitely would have been counted right. Okay, that's okay. Be like, maybe you might have got that right, but here's a way you definitely would have got that right.
Yeah,
and being able to go through that.
We'll talk about that later. That's what my term, subjectivity. I love that term.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So the other couple of big things here that I think that's important is this is an opportunity for us to practice all aspects of quizzing, not just answering questions. Use it. Let them practice contesting. And we're going to talk about contesting later, but contesting is more than just, and I talk about practice, I'm not talking about just the protocol, stand, state, and wait, but practice, what am I going to say? How am I going to approach this contest? this is a thought I had. Okay, Philip, I'm sitting here, we're reading this question. Hey, I had this thought. What about this? I don't know. Contest it for me. Formulate that thought. Tell me why that makes a difference.
Yeah, the first time they bring down a contest, or the first time they formulate and deliver a contest shouldn't be at a tournament.
At a tournament.
They should be.
So
in
practice those things. And then the big one is focus on eliminating mistakes. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. We have a whole slide for that. Eliminating mistakes for both of us is a huge, huge key. And the reason is because when you are trying to teach and you're trying to get your team to a highly competitive level, you have to interrupt at an advanced level earlier in the question. And if you are trying to interrupt at a 70 to 75% rate and you're making mistakes 10% of the time, you can't do that and win. You're affecting the point at which you can interrupt a question by the number of avoidable mistakes that you make. And we'll talk about that on this next slide. There are several different types of mistakes that we've sort of gone through and categorized. And we've broken them out here. On the left, you'll see sort of what the type of mistake is. And then on the right, maybe just some suggestions on how we might deal with those type mistakes. First of all, is silly mistakes.
Sometimes I call these dumb mistakes, but silly
I'm a
is
little
the
nicer.
But go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that the three sort of big things that contribute to mistakes are material command is number one, focus is another big one, and then pressure. Those are three things that contribute to mistakes. And so we understand that, and we can put our kids in situations so that they can practice those things, right? And so again, we go through some of these things on the left. Silly mistakes, things like, I forgot how many parts the question was, right? I mean, we've all seen that. I'm pretty sure there's people in this room that have done that. We forget how many parts the question were. I only answered one part and I thought I nailed it, and I sat there and waited and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then when they reread it, I was like, oh. Silly mistakes, avoidable mistakes. Why? Not focused. Weren't focused at the beginning of that question. Just things like that can make a difference. And so you have to work on eliminating those things. Work on giving your quizzer the best chance for success by making sure that they stay focused, they have material command, and that they can perform under pressure to the best of their ability.
I speak about focus a lot. Focus is a skill. What is a skill? A skill is something that we can practice and improve. I grew up in band and marching band and drumline, and they talk a lot about during your marching show, it's 13 minutes of pure focus. You're thinking about one thing. And you can't just do that. You can't just walk up and do that. That takes practice. That takes repetition. Where do we practice focus? In practice, in quiz practice. So if you show them, hey, you're struggling with your focus, that's not because you're ADD and you can practice. We can improve on your focus with practice. And that's the only way we can eliminate silly mistakes. I want everybody to try one thing, especially with quizzers that may be not as aggressive or good at interrupting. Read a question like you're in practice, and then stop and just point at somebody and say, hey, repeat the question I just said.
Yep.
Especially with younger quizzers. Guess what? Some of them can't even tell you what you just said.
Or how many parts was the question? Some of them can't even tell you that. It's just a focus issue.
Right. You wonder why your kids aren't interrupting because they can't even tell you what you just said, and they can't, and that takes practice.
It's huge, especially on direct questions or 10-point questions, because if you miss the first two words, you're out of the question. I mean, if you're not there, if you're not zoned in, if you're not focused on those first 2 or 3 words, you're done. You're out. You've missed what you need there. Somebody else, while you're trying to figure out what's going on, somebody's already hit and answered the question. So focus is a huge key. Also, material command is a huge key. You cannot interrupt aggressively the way that you need to interrupt at a high level if you do not have command of the material. And there is a big difference between I know it and I have command of it, as Philip has already talked about. Huge thing. Obviously, the way to improve that is you study. You just got to learn it. And there is no replacement, as he said, for repetition. There just isn't.
And time.
Anytime. And time, yeah.
Over time.
Finishing interruptions incorrectly. Why am I not doing this correctly? And again, this kind of goes to coaches knowing what it is. You have to know what's correct before you can relay it to somebody what's correct. So that's on us. And then we help them understand what it is they're not doing correctly. And you address that by doing question drills. You address that by breaking down questions. We're going to spend a lot of time this afternoon really deep diving into questions and understanding why we're interrupting at the places we're interrupting. And it will really tie all the things we talked about this morning together. But understand questions, study questions. Interruption discipline. What do I mean by that? Where are you hitting? Are you interrupting aggressively or patiently? I want to explain a little later what the difference between those two things is, how you can illustrate those things when looking at a question. So that I got to the point where I had these two young men that quizzed very well. And for a long period of time, by the time they were 16, 17 years old, I could say to them, I want you to quiz aggressively in this quiz. Or I could call a timeout and say, okay, we need to be more patient. And Avery knows what I'm talking about. You guys were at the same place. And just by saying those words, they understood what it was that I was asking of them, and they altered the way they quizzed accordingly. And we will show you some ways that, well, same question, where's patient, where's aggressive, right? And you have to understand those things and be able to relay those things. Interruption, discipline. And then the big thing is unavoidable mistakes, because there are mistakes that you're going to make that are just going to happen just because life happens.
Yeah, well, as a question writer, sometimes, you wrote that question at 11:30 p.m. when you should probably be in bed.
Well,
and
here's
you wrote maybe the question wasn't quite
here's
what
a
it
good
should be.
example
And,
that I say about this, because one of the things that we teach is be very aggressive in the tens, right? If you want to advance, if you want to quiz at a high level, I believe that you have to be very aggressive in the tens, especially on direct questions. But it seems like every quiz, there is that one question that starts, who, according to Mark chapter 3, verse 7, you're probably going to miss that, because you're going to get who, according to Mark, you're probably not going to get it. How many times does that happen to you, Avery? A lot of times. And those are those mistakes where you just say, okay, we live with it. But you know what? We're going to eliminate all the avoidable mistakes so that one mistake still allows us to stay at that interruption percentage that we need to be at to win that quiz.
Yeah.
That's why we have to eliminate all those avoidable mistakes, because there will be times when you do something the way you're supposed to do it, you hit it where you think you should hit it, and you just miss it. It's just not what you thought it would be.
Yeah, you should be able to categorize your kids' mistakes and practice at tournaments. Be like, okay, that was a knowledge material mistake. Misquoted it. Oh, he couldn't pull that. That's a command and material mistake. Oh, you made a 4-part instead of a 3-part. That was a focus mistake. It was a quotation question. You hit on quote the verse. That was an interruption discipline mistake. That was something that, you just hit too aggressively there. You didn't hit aggressively enough. And that, to me, this is just something that I've observed. I don't know if this is true, but I think interruption discipline is a reward for daily discipline. It can be. I don't know. I feel like the most disciplined hitters at the board, the kids that can just crush it, are the ones that have that daily discipline in their life. If you don't have a daily life discipline, how can you expect to be disciplined at the board? I mean, and that might not be true completely, but that's just something that I've just kind of observed over the years. And then you have to make note of the mistakes, like we said, category, be able to say that was that kind of mistake, that was that kind of mistake, and figure out, okay, what can we do? How can I help this kid avoid that mistake, making that same mistake again? And then another thing is, you're at a tournament and your kid misses a question and you don't know why. We got to find out. We got to know why. And you have to do it respectfully, and you have to do that in the right manner, and you have, at the right time.
We'll talk about how to approach that a little bit later.